שירו לאדוני, שיר חדש, שירו לאדוני, כל הארץ, שירו לאדוני, ברכו שמו, בסכו מיום ליום ישועתו. שירו לאדוני שיר חדש, שירו לאדוני כל הארץ, שירו לאדוני ברכו שמו, בסכו מיום ליום ישועתו. ספרו בגויים כבודו, לכל העמים נפלאותיו, כי גדול אדוני ומהולל מאוד, נורא הוא על כל אלוהים. שירו לאדוני שיר חדש, שירו לאדוני כל הארץ, שירו לאדוני ברכו שמו, בסכו מיום ליום ישועתו. ספרו בגויים כבודו, לכל העמים נפלאותיו, כי גדול אדוני ומהולל מאוד, נורא הוא על כל אלוהים. שירו לאדוני שיר חדש, שירו לאדוני כל הארץ, שירו לאדוני ברכו שמו, בסכו מיום ליום ישועתו. ספרו בגויים כבודו, לכל העמים נפלאותיו, כי גדול אדוני ומהולל מאוד, נורא הוא על כל אלוהים. שירו לאדוני, שירו לאדוני, שירו לאדוני. ספרו בגויים כבודו, לכל העמים נפלאותיו, כי גדול אדוני ומהולל מאוד, נורא הוא על כל אלוהים. שירו לאדוני שיר חדש, שירו לאדוני כל הארץ, שירו לאדוני ברכו שמו, בסכו מיום ליום ישועתו. שירו לאדוני, שיר
warm day, among many. And I'm excited that Corey Palmer is leading services with me this morning. I would like to begin with a nigun, and I would like to say that I am learning guitar. So please sing along as you pick it up. Yai lai, yai lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai, yai lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai, yai lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai, yai lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai, yai lai, yai lai lai. We will begin on page 67 at the bottom of the page. Please read responsively with us. May the door of the synagogue be wide enough to receive all who hunger for love, all who are lonely for friendship.
May it welcome all who have cares to unburden, thanks to express, hopes to nurture.
May the door of the synagogue be narrow enough to shut out pettiness and pride, envy and enmity.
May its threshold be no stumbling block to young or straying feet.
May it be too high to admit complacency, selfishness, and harshness.
May this synagogue be, for all who enter, the doorway to a richer and more meaningful life. We continue on page 77. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. With divine wisdom, you have made our bodies, combining veins, arteries, and vital organs into a finely balanced network. Wondrous maker and sustainer of life, were one of them to fail, how well we are aware, we would lack the strength to stand before you. Blessed are you, Adonai, source of our health and strength. Baruch atah Adonai, rofeh chol basar umafli la'asot. We continue on page 78.
Elohai neshama shenatata b'tehorahi. Elohai neshama shenatata b'tehorahi. Elohai neshama shenatata b'tehorahi. Elohai neshama shenatata b'tehorahi. Elohai neshama shenatata b'tehorahi.
We continue together in the English on page 88. These are things that are limitless, of which a person enjoys the fruit of the world, while the principle remains in the world to come. They are honoring one's father and mother, engaging in deeds of compassion, arriving early for study, morning and evening, dealing graciously with guests, visiting the sick, providing for the wedding couple, accompanying the dead for burial, being devoted in prayer, and making peace among all people. But the study of Torah encompasses them all. We continue with Chatzi Kaddish on page 106. Please rise.
Yitkadav, yitkadash, shemei rabba, amen. V'amad yivrach chirutei, v'yamnich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yamechon, v'chayirechu beit Yisrael. B'hagala v'zeman kariv, v'yimeru, amen. Yehi shemei rabba mevorach, le'olam olam me'omaya. Yitbarach, Yitbarach v'yishtabach, Yitpar v'yamam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitala, shemei l'kudesha b'richu. Leila min kol b'chata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechemata, damiron be'alema, v'yimeru, amen. Baruchu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
We continue with Yotzer Or on page 110. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Yotzer or uvarei choshech, oseh shalom uvarei et hakol, hameir la'aretz v'ladarim aleha barachamim, uv tuvo mechadesh bechol yom tamid, ma'aseh v'reshit. Ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam bechokma asita, mal'ah haaretz kinyanecha. Tit barach Adonai Eloheinu, al shevach ma'aseh yadecha, ve'al me'orei or she'asita yefa'arucha sela, or chadash al Tzion ta'ir, b'niskeh chulanu mehera le'oro, baruch atah Adonai, yotzer hame'orot. On page 113 at the top. Once or twice in a lifetime, a man or woman may choose a radical leaving, having heard Lech Lecha, go forth. God disturbs us toward our destiny by hard events and by freedom's now urgent voice, which explode and confirm who we are. We don't like leaving, but God loves becoming. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher be'amo Yisrael be'ahava.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. You may be seated. Please join me on page 116 with Ve'ahavta. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol me'adecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'beitecha u'v'lechtecha b'derech u'v'shochbecha u'v'kumecha u'kshartam leot hayadecha ve'hayu letotafot b'neinecha u'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'v'yishar mitzvotai, v'yitem kedoshim leloechem. Ani Adonai Elohechem, asher hotzeitiechem me'eretz Mitzrayim, liot lachem le'Elohim. Ani Adonai Elohechem, emet.
On page 123, the good in us will win over all the wickedness, over all the wrongs we have done. We will look back at the pages of written history and be amazed, and then we will laugh and sing. And the good that is in us, children in their cradles, will have won. Our hearts beat with certainty that there is a day and an hour and a mountain called Zion, and that all of the sufferings will gather there and become song, ringing out into every corner of the earth from end to end, and the nations will hear it. And like the caravans in the desert, we all to that morning throng.
Mi chamocha is just across the page on page 122. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, nor tehilot osef ele, shira chadasha shibechu geulim, לשמך שפתיים יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל ובדכנו מכה יהודה וישראל. גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו קדוש ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
Please rise for the Amidah on page 124.
Adonai sefatai tiftachu fi agitei latecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor ve'hanora, Eloyon, Kol Mel Chasadim Tovim, Ve'konei Hakol, Ve'zocher Chastei Avot V'imahot, U'mevii Geula Livnei V'neihem, Leman Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham Ve'ezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor le'olam Adonai, Mechayeh kol atah Rav lehoshia, Morid hatal, Mechakel Chaim bechesed, Mechayeh hakol berachamim rabim, Somech noflim v'rofeh cholim, U'matir asurim, U'mekayem emunato, Lishenei afar, Michamocha ba'al givurot, U'mido melech, Melech meimit u'mechayeh, U'matzmiach Yeshua, B'nei atah l'chayot hakol, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayeh hakol. Page 130. Nekadesh et shemecha ba'olam, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב היד נביאך, וקרא זה על זה ואמר, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ, כבודו. אדיר, אדירנו, אדוני, אדוננו, מאדיר שמך בכל הארץ. ברוך כבוד אדוני במקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו, הוא מלכנו, הוא מושיענו והוא ישמיענו, ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהיך ציון, לדור ודור. הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גואלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
Please be seated. We will continue with Yismechu on page 136.
And actually, I think I'm going to do Vishamru today on 137. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat lidorotam berit olam. Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael, oti le'olam, oti le'olam. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat lidorotam berit olam. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם.
We continue on page 137. Ever-present one, may we, your people Israel, be worthy in our deeds and our prayer, wherever we live, wherever we seek you, in this land, in Zion restored, in all lands, you are our God, alone whom we serve and reverence. Baruch atah Adonai, she'otecha levadecha b'yirah na'avod. On page 138. We acknowledge with thanks that you are Adonai, our God, and the God of our ancestors forever. You are the rock of our lives and the shield of our salvation in every generation. Let us thank you and praise you for our lives which are in your hand, for our souls which are in your care, for your miracles that we experience every day, and for your wondrous deeds and favors at every time of day, evening, morning, and noon. O good one whose mercies never end, O compassionate one whose kindness never fails, we forever put our hope in you. For all these things, O sovereign, let your name be forever praised and blessed. O God, our Redeemer and Helper, let all who live affirm you and praise your name in truth. Blessed are you, Adonai, your name is goodness, and you are worthy of thanksgiving. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha lecha na'eh lehodot.
Sim, 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 shalom, sim, 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 shalom, tova uveracha. Sim, 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 shalom, sim, 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 shalom, sim, 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 shalom, tova uveracha. Ya la 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 la, ya la la, ya la 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 la, ya la la, ya la 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 la, ya la la, ya la la, ya la 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 la. Sim, 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 shalom, sim, 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 shalom, sim, 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 shalom, tova uveracha. Please take a moment now for your own silent prayers. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
Seder Kriyat HaTorah, our service for the reading of Torah, is on page 244.
Please rise.
Please.
Ein kamocha v'Elohim Adonai, ve'en kemasecha. Malchutcha malchut kol olamim, u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. Adonai os le'amo yitin, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom.
Responsively on page 247. In this scroll is the secret of our people's life from Sinai until now.
Its teaching is love and justice, goodness and hope. Freedom is its gift to all who treasure it. Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah. Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah. Le'amo Yisrael b'kedushato. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo, Gadlul Adonai iti, unomema Shemo yachdav. Lecha Adonai hagdula, v'agvura בשמיים ובארץ. לך אדוני הממלכה והמתנשא לכל ראש. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. יאללה לה 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 לה. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. יאללה לה 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 לה. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. You may be seated.
Okay, there's a special choreography to masks and ear mics, so kudos to y'all for doing this every week. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. The beginning of this week's portion of Pinchas starts by tying up the end of last week's Parashat Balak. At the end of Balak, we learn that while the Israelites were staying at Shittim, some of the Israelite men profaned themselves with Moabite women who invited these men to sacrifice to their God. Adonai's punishment instructed to Moses was to have all of the ringleaders publicly impaled. However, as Moses relays the instructions to the officials of Israel, Pinchas, our eponymous character for this week's portion, killed an Israelite man and Midianite woman who apparently moved to have intimate relations in the sight of the whole congregation of Moses and the whole Israelite community. Our portion this week opens with Adonai telling Moses that Pinchas has made expiation for the sins of the Israelite men who tied themselves to the Midianite god through his passion. Well, that and the plague that God visited upon the Israelites, slaying some 24,000 of their ranks. The linchpin presents itself as one of passion for passion. God seemingly absolves the passion of God's decree that instructed all of the ringleaders be publicly impaled, with the passion of Pinchas taking the spear and executing this Israelite man and Midianite woman, who we learn to be Zimri and Cosbi. The rest of the portion continues in typical Bamidbar Numbers fashion, with another census, instructions on how land should be apportioned to the tribes. Joshua is chosen as Moses' successor. Ritual prescriptives surrounding sacrifices for the festivals are laid out, and likely the most famous part of the parasha, where the daughters of Zelophehad advocate for their own allotment of land, despite the fact their father had no sons. This past Shabbat during Torah study, instead of our normal review of an earlier part, often the beginning of the week's portion, we looked at the very end of Balak and the beginning of the next week's portion, this portion, Pinchas. Looking at these parashiot next to each other, I really began to consider something I hadn't in previous years of reading these portions completely separately from each other. That God grants a Berit Shalom, a covenant of peace, to Pinchas, who killed two people in an act of zealous rage. Is it right that a man of his own volition, in this case not even of the group of leaders instructed by Moses, to have taken God's will into his own hands, executing this man and woman with no due process? What do we take away from God's granting this Berit Shalom to Pinchas? Do we think such acts of zealotry should be encouraged? Is peace granted to those who right what they perceive to be spiritual wrongs through acts of vigilante violence? When I look at Pinchas's actions as a gay man, and even as a Jew, it gives me pause. I can't help but think about atrocities committed under the auspices of religious zealotry throughout the world over millennia. We see such violent zealotry play itself out on the world stage in our modern day with striking frequency. I think of religious persecution of Jewish people over the millennia and until today. I think of the violent religious persecution of minority classes of people, both historically and in modern times. The violence towards women over their rights to bodily autonomy, the violence against the LGBT community because of the lifestyle that is not supported by some religious beliefs. And many of our rabbis over the centuries have lauded Pinchas's actions and praised him for taking things into his own hands. In Zevachim, the first tractate of Seder Kodashim, we read, as Rabbi Elazar says, that Rabbi Hanina says, Pinchas did not become a priest until he killed Zimri, as if it was this act alone that let the son of Aaron become a Kohen. Kli Yakar tells us he was self-sacrificing to sanctify Hashem's name, although he was among the congregation, which was a dangerous situation due to Zimri's relatives. Nevertheless, he risked his life. This seems to glorify this act of violence as one of self-sacrifice to sanctify God, despite the fact that Zimri, whom he killed, was a prince of the Israelites, and he may well have feared reprisal. Or HaChaim said that God elevated Pinchas's priesthood to an even higher level than his lineage would bear, saying, in his wisdom, God decided to accord Pinchas the priesthood as a gift in order to demonstrate that he did not become a priest merely through a hereditary claim to the priesthood instead of a claim based on moral excellence. By appointing Pinchas as priest directly, God elevated the meaning of Pinchas's priesthood, made it into something which he could point to as a mark of personal distinction. There's a sentiment among many of these older rabbinic texts that truly seems to encourage this type of religious zealotry and vigilantism. As a Reformed Jew living in the 21st century, this clashes with my modern sensibilities, but it has been a point of contention for longer than just our modern day. We can look to the commentary of 19th century Rabbi Naphtali Zvi Yehuda Berlin, the Netziv, who said, in reward for turning away the wrath of the Holy One, blessed be he, God blessed Pinchas with the attribute of shalom, that he should not be quick-tempered or angry, since as it was only natural that such a deed as Pinchas should leave in his heart an intense emotional unrest afterward, the divine blessing was designed to cope with this situation and promised inner peace and tranquility. This text gives us a glimpse into rabbinic commentary where the focus is not about glorifying this act of violence, but that the blessing of peace God granted Pinchas was meant to keep him from such acts in the future, that he might be able to keep the way of shalom, the way of peace, instead of engaging in such violent acts. In Iturei Torah, we find, after the great zealousness that he acted upon for God, God gives him as a gift the covenant of shalom. It is as if the Torah is hinting that the path of shalom is always preferable to and more successful than the path of zealousness and war. We can see that the thought process has also been engaged here to subvert the act of violence through the message of peace. Fulfilling the trope of two Jews, three opinions, I'll circle back to Zevachim, which goes on to say that Pinchas did not become a priest until he had made peace among the tribes. This also seems to put the concept of peace in front of the violence of Pinchas's act, insinuating that he wasn't able to fully step into the priesthood until he had made peace among the tribes he had angered with his action of killing Zimri, who was a clan chief. I think it's also worth in our exploration to look a little more closely at the people that Pinchas killed, Zimri and Cosby. In his article titled Heroic or Sinful on myjewishlearning.com, Rabbi James Jacobson Mazels brings to light Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Leiner's Midrash, which teaches us that Zimri and Cosby are cosmic soulmates, that these two individuals are indeed star-crossed lovers who, by their commitment and love to each other, are both following the divine will by engaging in their relationship. It's worth noting that those who cheer Pinchas's actions are doing so from a standpoint of ethnic purity, that this prohibition of Israelites marrying or having relations with non-Israelites, which would lead to the dilution and potential failure of the Jewish people to continue, should be met with such swift justice. The irony here is that Moses was raised as an Egyptian. Pinchas's own name is Egyptian, and there were many wives taken by men in our Torah who were from clans outside of those counted as the Israelites. Circling back to Rabbi Leiner's commentary, the takeaway is that Zimri and Cosby were acting according to God's will, and Pinchas ultimately was immature and rash and failed to see their union as its own act of righteous rebellion. It is easy, and I find it so very relevant in our current climate, to react rashly and quickly to the news of learning someone believes something that we fundamentally disagree with. to take their point of view and discard it immediately and without much thought because it doesn't align with what we believe to be true for ourselves. While in our modern times we may not be lashing out violently to impose our beliefs on another person, I know I can think to times where I've internally reacted with a quick, declarative, personal narrative about those I interact with. The haste with which I've acted in such times and in such ways is, in its own way, an act of violence. I know that the Torah came about in a time that was very different than our modern day, but in a world torn by violence and pain, a world sick with the battles of zealotry for one faith faction or another, it is prudent to remind ourselves that such violence is not the means to which we seek our end. If we are to move forward and into the Messianic age, a time when all people can be one people, and we reach that true shalom in a global sense, that we do so by ways of peace. Violence begets violence, and peace begets peace. And sometimes violence, hopefully, begets peace. This Shabbat, may our ways be of peace, and may we be mindful in our pursuit of Tikkun Olam. Shabbat Shalom.
So hopefully you picked up a sheet on your way in with the Torah verses. I'm going to be reading from the beginning of the portion, and the blessings are on page 250. Let me just find it. Somebody put a nice little X on there, which makes it easy to find. It probably means that it needs to be fixed. It's page 250. Please join us in the blessings. Baruch hu et Adonai hamvorach. Baruch Adonai hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon haKohen, Heshiv et chamati me'al bnei Israel, bekan o et kinati betocham, v'lo chiliti et bnei Israel bekanati. Lachen emor hineni noten lo et briti shalom ve'haita lo ulzaro acharav berit kehunat olam tachat asher kinei lelohav v'yechaper el bnei Yisrael. And blessing after. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. And with the Torah out, we take a moment to think of those in our lives who are in need of healing, of body, of soul. Please think of those in your lives that need healing. You may say their names out loud or to yourself. And please join me in Misha Berach, which is on page 253. Misha Berach Avotenu Mikor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha Berach imotenu Mikor habracha lavotenu Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. I will invite you to rise as we lift the Torah and prepare to return it to the ark. וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל, על פי אדוני ביד משה. וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל, על פי אדוני ביד משה. יאי לי 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 לי, יאי לי 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 לי, יאי לי 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 לי, יאי לי לי לי, יאי לי לי לי, יאי לי לי לי, יאי לי לי li. Page 256. Got it? Eitz chaim hi lamachzikim ba v'tomcheha meushar derocheha tochenom v'chol netivoteha shalom. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva chadesh yameinu kekedem.
The concluding portion of our service, Aleinu, is on page 283.
Aleinu לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שהוא שם חלקנו לייחד את שמו, וגור עלינו להמליך מלכותו, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. You may be seated. Our memorial meditation can be found on page 289. In nature's ebb and flow, God's eternal law abides. When tears dim our vision or grief clouds our understanding, we often lose sight of God's eternal plan. Yet we know that growth and decay, life and death, all reveal a divine purpose. God, who is our support in the struggles of life, is also our hope in death. We have set God before us and shall not despair. In God's hands are the souls of all the living and the spirits of all flesh. Under God's protection we abide, and by God's love we are comforted. O life of our life, soul of our soul, cause your light to shine into our hearts and fill our spirits with abiding trust in you. This week, we remember those who died at this season in years past: Carol Adler, Margaret Barnes, Meyer Barnett, Carl Beer, Marion Benedict, Stanley Berman, Clara Braslaw, Valerie Brown, Henry Cohen, Pearl Lee Coyne, Richard Dulcimer, Lawrence Finkel, Alec Fisher, Jack Flashberg, Sidel Gottlieb, Horace C. Hall III, Herbert Halstead, York Brom Jacobs, Leon Jacobson, Susan Jacobson, Brian David Kasser, Carlene Hammer Kaufman, Richard Kirschberg, Harry Kersner, Tibby Callison Kotz, Lester Landy, Marvin Lebman, Joshua Evan Levine, Jean Lipset, Rita Luft, Babette Marcus, Louis Matisoff, Lillian Mongite, Stephen Palins, Ethel Penner, Ann Polonsky, Sylvan Polonsky, Donald Pomerantz, Foley Rappaport, Jacob Ricklin, Ralph Rosenbaum, Mildred Charlack Sachs, William Saxon Jr., Dr. Irving Schoenfeld, Ellie Taylor Seiden, Dr. Alan G. Silver, John Patrick Smith, Melvin Tactile, Charles Way, Ralph L. Williams. To these names we add those who are observing Shloshim, the first 30 days of mourning, Sarah Hart, Helene Ingram, and one who is observing Shiva, the first week of mourning, Hadassah Langbaum. We bring those names into our hearts along with others in our hearts and minds, and we rise together for Kaddish, which is on page 294. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'omad divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chaychon v'yamechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, v'agala v'izman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mavarach le'olam u'lamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei kudusha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbichata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalama Rabbah min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us and to all Israel, and we say together, amen. So unfortunately, in helping us to stay safe during this surge in COVID, we have halted food at Temple, any kind of food gatherings. But we're so glad that you joined us today, and hopefully soon we'll be able to bring back our Kiddush and Motzi. But I hope that you will join me on page 339 with Esainai. Esainai el harim, me'ayin yavo ezri. Esainai el harim, me'ayin yavo ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai, Oseh shamayim v'aretz. Ezri me'im Adonai, Oseh shamayim v'aretz. Esainai el harim, me'ayin yavo ezri. Esainai el harim, me'ayin yavo ezri. Shabbat shalom. And I forgot, thank you to Corey for a lovely devar, very inspiring and words to think about, and for helping with the service. Thank you.